Hey guys, moving on with Module 1, Lesson 4. We're going to be talking briefly about the economic and social changes that is happening um, in America. Okay, so look, there are tons of stuff that's happening, but you went over that in great detail last year. So we're just briefly hitting on this. Okay, so look, since the beginning um, of our country, in the early, I guess you can say like 1800s. Um, there's, we have different regions in this country with different types of, temperatures, right? And they're so different across our continent, right? And so even weather conditions and climate are going to play a role in how these different regions develop. Okay, because if you look at the north, right, you're going to be an industrialized economy. If you look at the south, you're going to be agriculture, or maybe the southwest agriculture. Okay, but we're going to start with the north. Well, the Industrial Revolution did not start in the United States. Okay, the Industrial Revolution started over in Great Britain. Okay, so over in Great Britain, they led the world in textile production. Now, remember, textile means cloth. Okay, and if you ever worked in one of these factories, right, you were forbidden to leave the country because Great Britain did not want the secret to get out on how they were making so much money and how these machines worked. Well, um, a guy by the name of Samuel Slater, he was forbidden to leave the country because he knew the workings of the cotton spinning machine, right? And so he's going to sneak out of England in disguise. He's going to sail across the Atlantic Ocean called the Pond, right? And he's going to land in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Okay, so in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, he sets up the very first uh, mill. Okay, all right, so that was in Pawtucket. Look, we know that there's three stages in the manufacturing of cloth, right? Samuel Slater's, factory only did one. You take, it was like a cotton mill, right? And you take one, the world's most important fiber, which is cotton, and you spin that into thread. Okay, it's going to be later on that these three Bostonians are going to name their mill town after Francis Lowell, one of the owners that died. Um, they're going to call it Lowell Mills, and they're going to develop all three stages of the manufacturing of cloth, right? Going from cotton to, spinning it into thread, then weaving it, and you have a piece of cloth at the end, right? And so with the South, the North is doing that. The South is an agriculture power. And, you know, with Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton engine, which we call cotton gin for short, it sends us out on a completely different, route. Okay. It was in 1793 that this was invented. Now, he also did other stuff later on, like he displayed interchangeable parts in front of President John Adams, right? But if you can, if you can, if you can separate the seeds from the cotton, cotton's gonna be profitable, right? I mean, there were gins before Whitney's, yeah, but those gins were more like washing machine clothes wringers, like you might see people in the old days use. It was like friction from rude rollers could remove seeds from long stale cotton, but not from short, which is what we were growing. They were going to the south, right? So, because the south's climate is better for shorter cotton, okay? And so when he invented this, now it's profitable, right? And so it became white gold, and I'm talking people became millionaires overnight with this stuff, right? I mean, if you're a poor person armed with a gin, cotton gin, you can buy land and start growing, right? Well, all right. So the market revolution. Now, today, if we think about the market revolution, We think about maybe going to Target or Publix or Walmart. We go to the market to purchase our goods, right? Well, it's got to start somewhere, right? And so for the first half of like the 1800s, um, you know, the market economy was kind of brought on by the Industrial Revolution, right? And so people are now going to be able to, um, well, you can buy and sell your goods rather than making them yourself, right? And so there's going to be like inventions that's going to fuel the economy. Okay, so even going back to like the cotton gin and Eli Whitney, right? So that's going to help fuel the economy of the South, right? But it also has a dark side because with the invention of the cotton gin, the expansion of slavery is just going to go through the roof. I mean, talking about a 30-year period, the enslaved population went from 700,000 to 1.5 million. But in contrast, in the North, they didn't depend on cotton because their climate and their soil is different, right? Most states by 1804 had abolished slavery. And so they're more focused on a different type of economy. And this is where the market revolution does come in, right? Mostly up north. And so, as time goes on, buying and selling is going to multiply. And if people, you know, if you're selling more, you're going to make more money, right? And so, look, up into 1840s, our economy hadn't really grown that much. But in 1840, it took like a huge hike, right? Because our economy is picking up pace, all right? And then we have these, we have free enterprise that is, this means that we give private businesses uh, can operate um, for profit and not have a lot of the government regulating businesses, right? And then there's so many out there in the pursuit of money. There's if you ever watch Shark Tank, we know these people. There are people out there called entrepreneurs, right? It means to undertake. You invest your money. The only reason you do that is because you're going to risk losing everything, but you want a profit, okay? And so there's tons of people out there that's going to do this. Couple of inventions I want to mention real quick. Last year, you guys talked about Samuel Slater, right? Not Samuel Slater. I'm sorry, Robert, not Robert Fulton. More. Let me get up here now. Morse code, right? Um, so Samuel Morse was like a student, like at Yale University. And when he was at Yale, he learned about this new science of electricity. And he constructed like batteries in chemistry class, right? So he was interested in the art and the science, all right? Um, and so, he realized how hard of a time he was going to have supporting himself as like an artist and all these interests in the arts and sciences he really loved. Later on, he's going to concentrate on his scientific work. But what he did in the beginning is it's actually pretty cool. He, of course, um, painter, scientist, whatever. He built an electromagnetic telegraph. Um, and the first model, you can only send messages tapped to wire code across maybe 10 miles. Well, they up that to more, and then it gets, the government's going to fund it, and it's going to be over 100 miles, right? Worth of telegraph line, mostly in the north, and it went from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. This is going to be very important when the Civil War breaks out, too, right? And so Morse tapped in code the verse, "What hath God wrought," which comes from the book of Numbers, I believe 23:23. And so keep that in mind when we talk about the Civil War real soon. Next big invention is Robert Fulton. He had this boat called the Clermont. Okay, and this is going to bring in the steamboat era. Uh, the Clermont, which is pretty cool, is part of the transportation system. right? Um, Made a 150-mile trip up the Hudson River from New York City to Albany. It took about 32 hours. And this led to more steamboats being found on our nation's rivers, Ohio, Mississippi, right? And these steamboats can carry passengers and they can carry freights, right? And so water transportation is really important this time because they're just moving raw material all over the country, right? And then the days of canal building lasted a while. The one of the largest canals you've probably heard of is the Erie Canal. Um, the Erie Canal connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. Okay, but canals, um, however, became obsolete. Not really. I mean, not obsolete. I hate to say it like that, but uh, railroads are going to come around, and they benefit. You can travel over almost any terrain as long as you have tracks. Right, started in England by the steam power locomotives and started operating in the United States later on. So tracks are faster. You can go anywhere as long as you have tracks. And then, so we have all these revolutions that are going to be transforming, um, you know, everything. It's going to help people's lives out, right? Another entrepreneur, Goodyear, he was like the obsessed guy uh, who came up with vulcanization, right? How to keep rubber elastic. Like it's a method called vulcanization, named after the mythological god of fire. Goodyear's first invention of this was like used on the soles of shoes. Look, the boy died penniless in 1860, so I mean, he had no idea what the Goodyear brand means today, right? A couple other inventions that made just life a little bit easier. John Deere invented the first steel plow. You can slice through the soil more easily. And then Cyrus McCormick, the mechanical reaper. There's other changes that's happening in the workplace. So this market revolution, we changed the way we're buying goods, right? People now can go to work. Production is moved maybe out of the home, right, into factories. So you're going to split the modern family up. Maybe your family farm is failing, and if you and your husband or your wife have a kid, though you may have to go work in the factories and send their money back home, but they're going to be living in the factories. Like those wool mills we talked about in Massachusetts. Well, the manufacturing of cloth was done under one mill. So they hired mostly unwed females. They could pay them less than men. You could work them like a dog 12 hours a day, right? You could close the windows in the summertime so the thread won't break. And I mean, all these lung problems. And look, back in the day before Commonwealth versus Hunt, before that, people did not have the right to go on strike. So if you were working at a wool mill, right, and they announced a 15% pay cut, whatever, well, even if you went on strike, which means work stoppage, they could just let you go, right? So either you go on strike, be fired, your family's going to suffer, right? Or suck it up, take the 15% pay cut, or they can replace you by this enormous amounts of immigrants that's come to the country that will be glad to have a paying job, okay? Because a large number of immigrants coming to this country are escaping a starvation over in Ireland called the Great Potato Famine, right? And if you made your way across the Atlantic Ocean in these, coffin ships, most didn't make it, a lot did, right? They'd be glad to have a job. All right. So, look, there's a lot of reform that's going to happen. We have the Second Great Awakening, second come back to Jesus meeting. People were like, church attendance is down, we got to bring it back in. Charles Finney was, he was the guy that was like, uh, he was like a fire and brimstone preacher. And if you walked into one of his revivals, he would sit you up front on what he called his anxious bench because he knew you're fixing to convert. Then you had the Transcendentalists. Ralph Waldo Emerson was the leader. Find truth in nature. Go by what your consciousness is telling you to do. Uh, One of his buddies, Henry David Thoreau, lived on, Walden Pond outside of Concord, Massachusetts. Lived alone in the woods for, man, a couple of years and built a cabin for like $28. Then you have the African American Methodist Episcopal Church, founded by Richard Allen. He is a black man. The AME Church was a black church. Other reformers, you have the abolition, which those, if you're an abolitionist, you're against slavery. This white man was a radical abolitionist named William Lloyd Garrison. He had a newspaper called The Liberator, where he said, slaves should be free without any payment to the owners. When Frederick Douglass escaped slavery, he was a big reader of The Liberator. He teamed up with Garrison, but eventually broke away and founded his newspaper called the North Star, then changed it to the Frederick Douglass newspaper to show that, black people can have a paper named after them. Okay, so look, all this, when you're holding people in bondage or whatever, sometimes there's going to be a breaking point. Nat Turner was a gifted preacher uh, living in Southampton County, Virginia, right? In 1831, he saw an eclipse and thought this was a sign from God to end slavery. And he really tried to, but eventually he is going to get captured. He's going to be hanged and he's going to be skinned. And then the laws are just going to tighten up on slaves. More about that later, right? And I want you to think about all these things that are happening in our country's past. We're gonna have to reflect back on all this when we talk about it this year. Okay, women were big abolitionists, right? And if you think about it, there's a lot of abolitionists. A lot of them were white women because they were also considered second class citizens. They raised the money, they distribute literature, right? Pamphlets. You had the temperance movement, which was there to try to prohibit the sale of alcohol because, it was like the devil's Kool-Aid to people back in the day, I guess. It kind of is still today. You had Dorothea Dix, who's trying to make prison reform. She visited a Massachusetts house correction and found that people that had mental illness, right, were in these prison hospitals were hardcore criminals, and these people couldn't help the way they acted, so they chained them naked to the wall and tried to beat them into obedience. Well, she's going to get that, worked on. Education, well, it's good if you're a man, white man. Um, most women, if you knew the geography of your house, and I hate to put it like that, but if you can keep a pot of water boiling, you were learned, right? School did start opening up for women, but it's going to be later on. Uh, First, we had to have some movement. I mean, some women to fight for this. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was really big into it, and Lucretia Mott. They went to the World's Anti-Slavery Convention over in England and were surprised because they were not allowed to speak. So when they came back home, they planned to hold a convention at Seneca Falls, and they were going to fight for the rights of women. Here on the screen, we have this beautiful woman named Isabella Baumfree, right? Uh, when she gets her freedom, she's going to take the name Sojourner Truth, and she is going to sojourn, travel around, and teach the truth about the evils of slavery. And her greatest, I guess, poem, I would call it, is Ain't I a Woman? Take your time, go back, take notes. Lesson 5 later.